So there is that.
Sure.
But so the only thing I can think of is in my tradition with the Book of Common Prayer, when you're confirmed or when you're married, often you'll have the bishop sign something, but I don't think you do it with the Bible. That's an unusual one. Yeah, exactly. But he always makes the cover, right? So I think it's one more thing, which is Exhibit 7000, of why is it that people of great religious faith have, to use the psalmist, put their trust in this prince.
Yeah, and Mika, this actually lends very well with something that a friend of mine, an old friend of mine, said this weekend, and said that they were sending me emails because they wanted to make sure that I made it to heaven, and the emails were talking about, I had not seen these emails, thankfully, about how I needed to be more loyal and faithful to Donald Trump. Now, lest you believe that this is a new phenomenon in evangelical churches, I had a good friend who's in the ministry at a church in the Pensacola area who told me during the Bush era that they had to actually bring people in, parishioners in, and let them know that somebody could believe in Jesus and accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior and not support George W. Bush 100% of the time. It is a strange, strange thing that has happened, not in American politics, but in American religion, especially among some evangelicals, where they have decided to render all of their faith, all of their belief, all of their trust in Caesar, and let God take a back seat. You can believe
Joe.
in... Yes.
Yeah, let me just, I think that's really important because, and just at the risk of total self-parody at this hour, the reason for the wall metaphor between church and state was not to protect the state from the church, but the church from the state. The original idea in the American experience, as so many people came across the Atlantic, Roger Williams, John Winthrop, and the Puritans had their moments, right? They fled persecution and they got here and they established theocracies in places like Massachusetts Bay. But you go to Pennsylvania, you go to Rhode Island, and you begin to see religious liberty as absolutely essential. And it was, as scholars call it, the first liberty. We were about religious liberty and liberty of conscience before we were about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you are particularly religious, the idea that you would trust the flawed, sinful, temporal world to be the center of your universe is in fact wrong-headed. Your focus has to be on the next kingdom, less so than on this kingdom. And I think that there's been an inversion, particularly since, I think that we've talked about this before. I think the big moment here, the Pearl Harbor of this particular crisis in American faith and American politics is not Roe versus Wade, but is the 1962 school prayer decision, where that's when conservatives who felt betrayed by Earl Warren, betrayed by Dwight Eisenhower, they began this obsession with the courts being the central undertaking in public life, because they believed that a court took God and put him out of the classroom. We're still living in that world.
Yeah, we are still living in that world, but Mika, it has accelerated. And it's accelerated over the past several years, I will say, for reasons that I don't completely understand. I do understand why evangelicals, why conservative Christians responded the way they did against what they consider to be a revolutionary decade in the 1960s and even going into the 1970s. I do understand that. I do not understand, though, putting faith in man above putting faith in God, especially when the man that so many leaders of the evangelical movement are putting their faith in is a man who, again, by his very words and his deeds and his actions every day, every single day, shows that his life's work, his life example, runs counter to every single beatitude, to every single lesson taught in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which really does sum up in 3 verses the ministry of Jesus Christ. And also Matthew 25, where the disciples come to Jesus, and again, this will be the end of the sermon. But the disciples come to Jesus and say, who's going to be seated at the right hand of the Father? And Jesus tells his disciples that it's the person that gives a cup of water in the Master's name and feeds the hungry, clothes the naked, takes care of the poor, visits the sick and those who are in prison, and he goes on and on. And again, this is not a close call. You line Donald Trump's policies and what he's focused on and up against Matthew 25, the Sermon on the Mount, and the story of the Good Samaritan. Just line it up and make your own judgment. It's not a close call. Let those who have ears to hear. And now let's go on to the budget.
Okay.
The FY 2020 budget.
Everyone said amen to that, and I hope Casey Hunt is with us.